I'm just gonna make a quick correction. I don't know my shit, like at all. I adore George. I don't know where he is, but I feel like this is the best conference. So I'm happy to be. Although we don't call it conference, I think we call it a event. I don't know. Anyways, so did I go all the way forward? We'll start over. Okay. So in New York, so I did high school, college, and 10 years or so in advertising in New York. So most of my identity, or how I identify myself, is more as a New Yorker than anything else. With that, there's this rite of passage that I don't know what the equivalent would be in Melbourne. It's basically when you wake up at the end of the subway line. Yes, there is the equivalent, like Geelong. Is it Geelong? Like you could maybe end up there, like if you had a really good night or you worked too late. So that's kind of what I feel has happened with AI, is I woke up and I don't know what happened last night. So that's my metaphor for this whole talk. Where we're going to start is the influences. So media influences and entertainment influences. So I did kind of like a retrospective of how AI has been represented in blockbuster movies, global movies, just to understand the role that it has taken and whether or not it's been a villain, a replacement, a servant, because those are messages that we are consuming and we're being influenced by. So the first one, I kind of ruined it because you already saw it, but we'll dive in. It's Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey. So there's this scene, everybody knows the quote of Hal opened the pod bay doors, and I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. Yet the reason Hal knows is because it read lips. So they went after and went into a pod, I think it was Dave and Frank at the time, and they went in and they talked about their strategy to try to outsmart Hal, which was the computer, and Hal was able to guess it because it read lips. So we called this at the time fantasy and science fiction. 1968. This is the original Westworld. This is, there's slides here. Okay, got it. I have to like crane my neck. I forgot about this. Okay, so Westworld, 1973, unstoppable robots. So this is where the robots in the amusement park, it was Michael Crichton's book, and they killed the visitors that came on the park. It has since been remade, and they malfunction, basically. And so AI and the robots are seen as villains. This is the first Blade Runner. It was Ridley Scott's, and it's where the moment where Harrison Ford explains to the robot that the emotions that they carry are not theirs, that it actually has been implanted into her with the memory chips and what have you. So fast forward, because we're not going to go through a whole cinema. You didn't come to hear that. But there's been a change that's happened recently where AI is no longer a villain, in the movies at least. And one of the ones that you're probably familiar with is Her, where the voice assistant takes, I think Samantha is Scarlett Johansson, the beautiful Scarlett Johansson that now, like her voice now is iconic. And there's these moments where the type is off. I'm such a typophile, but okay, so it didn't load properly, so forgive all the kerning mistakes. Anyways, there's this moment where she needs to disappear. She needs to go into the OS system. I think that they're doing an upgrade or such. And he's longing for the relationship and companionship that she's brought to his life. There's also an episode, I don't know if most are familiar with Black Mirror, it was redone, and there's an episode where the woman in this slide, she loses her husband, and so she orders a robot and starts living her life as if her husband hasn't died. I think it was a car accident. And she tries to replace the husband or her husband with this robot duplicate. But in this scene, she realizes that there's something missing that you can't transcribe. And it's this scene, and this is a lot of spoiler alerts. There's this scene where they're in the cliff, and he can't jump. And he can't jump it because it's not rational, rather because he doesn't have the fear. And so it was just this moment where she realizes that the emotion is so critical to the experience and companionship that her and her husband used to have. The Westworld was redone by HBO, and what was interesting in the role of AI is that that the villain became the person. So for example, in this scene, the worst thing of finding out that your best friend's a robot is finding out that you yourself are a robot. And that's the big spoiler in this scene. But it's fantastic. And so what you've seen, I've captured the box office revenue as this grows and grows. So these are messages, these are influences, these are external factors in our environment that are conditioning how we think about AI, whether or not we're consciously looking at it or not. Last but certainly not least is the Blade Runner, and these were just my selection. By no means is it exhaustive, again. But this was 2 years ago now, and he has a digital girlfriend. And it's this scene where he comes home from work, Frank Sinatra is playing, it's nostalgic, and she changes 4 different outfits depending on his mood, cooks him dinner, reads a book that she doesn't really care for. And so it becomes a different type of companionship, more of a submissive and kind of servant role of the AI. And then, of course, there's this scene that's an awkward moment where he is what I guess, most people believe is intimacy. It's this interaction that he has with a digital assistant where he's making out, and then he gets a call from his boss, which is quite funny, actually. So the premise for a bit of this talk is I don't think it's science fiction anymore. All of these movies were called either fantasy or I think was called romantic science fiction or fantasy science fiction. And as a researcher, I kind of took myself as a subject and try to understand, okay, if the future is tailored and personal experiences, and we're talking at PauseFest of the intimate future, then maybe I should go into my own digital footprint. So this is what you can maybe know of what's publicly available, or even through all the different platforms. And what I tried to do was not necessarily what I've posted, but how it could be inferred by others. So you could tag this as water sports. I love rafting. I love competitive rowing. I try to sail. We'll see how that goes next week. We're learning that on YouTube and then renting a boat. It's true, actually. I paint. I don't know if Shelly's in the audience, but we were talking about alcohol inks, and so anything where there's galleries, there's exhibitions, I post about it. I don't have a fascination with Rihanna, other than for some reason, not rational, think that she has the best haircut for curly hair. Totally not rational. The other thing is we embarked on a journey this adventure to purchase a wilderness lodge. And so I have a lot of collections of I'm playing interior design because that's what I think is actually a business venture, is more of the aesthetic of the interiors of those cabins. And then other things are, my pup, my dog. So you can tag some of these things based on my interests and my likes and my footprint. And so I thought, well, I know a little bit about kind of data. And so I looked at the things I searched for, the videos I watched, my location tracking, and the back end of what I do to just recognize patterns of the websites I visit, the ads that I click. And I found some surprises that I thought I should share with a group of strangers, because if brands know this about me, then I should be pretty comfortable in having complete strangers know this about me. So that we're going to test that out. This is where my sweating starts, right? Okay, so apparently I am tagged as loving celebrity news and gossip. And this was shocking to me, because I don't consider myself a gossiper, but Meghan Markle happened, right? The princess. And I binge watched all of Suits just to get to know the princess better. It's actually happened. Is it a vice? Is that what we call it when there's like this thing you don't really want to talk about? Okay, anyways. People know me as celebrity news and gossip. Not my best friends, not my family, not my partner, but apparently other people, the world. I also went to look at how many hours I actually watch. So I have a television in like a room in the corner of the house because I'm trying to watch less and less television, but I do carry my phone to my bed, so it kind of defeats the purpose. And I found out that I watched 4 weeks of drama in 2018. And I don't know what like my benchmark is for normal people or not normal people, but I know that 4 weeks in a year, it's like I did this math this morning when I was like, okay, how do I make sense of this? It's every 12 days I'm watching a day of television. That's a lot. And when I mean drama, I don't mean like news, like the drama that's going on in the US, right? Like political drama. I mean like drama like crime or Suits. It's a really good show, by the way. Okay. And what was fascinating to me is that I don't necessarily subscribe to like drama as an interest because I actually prefer comedy, or I'm more lifted or energized by different types of formats and medium. Nevertheless, that's what is known. The other is pretty safe. It's 3 weeks of pop, rock, or alternative music that I've listened to in 2018. I karaoke to Coolio, but they don't know that. And I do prefer folk music, believe it or not, and I paint to classical, but how I'm labeled or how I'm aggregated or how what my pattern of behavior that I'm maybe unconscious about is pop, rock, and alternative, which I found fascinating. I also have read 28 nonfiction books last year. And so this is, because I know the whole poppy thing in Australia, I just learned about this yesterday. So I don't really read these books, I just download them, right? I haven't read this many books. I maybe have heard them and then in a drive. But it's fascinating that people might think that I'm actually consuming 28 nonfiction books. They tend to be more of a junkie for self-help, or like the new UX thing or organizational design, like really nerdy books. And I wish I read more fiction. So if you have fiction recommendations, please send them my way. Nevertheless, 28 books. The other, I guess these were more surprising because I didn't realize. I think there's a frequency of behavior where you have a routine or you have almost a mechanism that you do things that you know that you're doing them, but then there's things that you do that you forgot that you did. And they still leave a footprint. They still leave something that could be an insight or be inferred. And so this one is real estate searches. So by clockwork, every 3 or 4 months, I look at real estate all over. Like I've looked in Melbourne, just because that's random, but just to see where people are living, how people are living, what the prices are. I also consider moving a lot, so it shows up. And again, it's not something that I'm sharing in conversations over dinner or with my family, right? Like I think it would freak out my parents if I decide to move again because I've moved more than 18 times thus far. But it's maybe a transition of things to come. The other one was there's been many times in the course of the years where I've considered parenting. And so I've looked at everything with regards to fostering, adopting, fertility and clinics, and that has been now what I receive as far as messaging and conditioning constantly, which is fascinating to me. Because a book can mean, the significance of your purchase of a book can mean so much in the ripples of what somebody might say about you. The other one that was very surprising was lived abroad. And it wasn't just that I've lived abroad, it's that a lot of my community lives abroad or doesn't live close proximity to me. And so that means that I have really close friends who live abroad. I'm away from my family in periods of my life, and I have been away from my hometown of where I was raised. And so this one kind of puzzled me because as a researcher, I don't know what I could infer about this other than it's interesting. It's not really noteworthy or something that's surprising, let's say, but I was still struck that what have I said, or what have I done, or what have I clicked, or what have I researched that would have given this insight, which happens to be true. All of these happen to be true, which is fascinating. It's kind of like the biometric mirror outside. I don't know if anybody has, yes? Like some of it, it's like a horoscope. You go there and you're like, well, I kind of like what they said, so that's accurate. And then the other ones are like, not so much. Like I was telling, aggressiveness was low for me, which I thought was quite comical. Lastly, an insight that was shared was that I'm an engaged shopper. Now, I really do not like shopping. And this means that I've clicked on something as a call to action, as like a shop now. So I see something on a platform, or I see something on the ether, and then I'm like, oh my God, this would look interesting, let me buy it, and I end up buying it. And so I didn't have the realization, no, that's shopping. Like, you do actually like to shop. So funny what you find out. Lastly, and I think it's more because of how far back this goes for me, this show came out 15 years ago, like 2004. Is that 15? I'm not really good at math. Yes? 15. Around that time, right? Yes? 15. Okay. I was obsessed with this show. Obsessed. And maybe that's the reason I'm in tech, is because it was mystical and it was like all about like almost choose your own adventure. But anyways, the platforms and brands still know that I love Lost. A lot of my friends don't even know that I used to watch shows like constantly. And I have a few friends in the audience who are like, oh, this is new about you. Okay. So basically where I landed is, how do we avoid intimacy? Because this really made me uncomfortable, the process and reflection, and I know that there's that first step of awareness. But joking aside, I thought, well, that you know all these things about me doesn't necessarily create intimacy. And that these brands know this about me doesn't necessarily. It might constitute convenience, all these different values and benefits for something to feel more tailored, more personal, and more contextual to me in how in my daily life. But it doesn't create intimacy. And so what I framed the conversation just to provoke this discussion, and whether that's today or going forward, is I framed a discussion of a framework around these 5 kind of criteria of we have to consider the role that something takes in our lives. So for example, the role that, not necessarily tech, right, but an individual, or how much meaning and significance do we place on that entity so that it does influence our behavior. And so whether that's a servant role, that's a replacement role, like specifically with AI, or a companion, I think most of the time we kind of feel a little bit awkward of what that might mean as far as companion, and yet it's going that way. If not, it's already there. The other part that I think we need to consider is context. So where does that interaction show up? This is a scene from AI where the woman, her son was in a coma, if I remember this correctly, and he wakes up. And so she has an AI robot that she's built a relationship with that she has to leave in the middle of the woods somewhere, which is weird. But anyway, so she's going to discard this rope. Maybe we should have a recycling program or a reuse program. Anyway, so, and the little boy, and it's a tearjerker. I mean, the little boy starts crying, is this a game? And like just the reaction and response you would have to that scene, the environment, the conditions that support that interaction between the woman and the child, or the robot child, I guess you would call it, right? It's context, it's surroundings, and it's understanding where that person came from and where that person's going. Before there's a judgment layer to this, yeah? The other part is the trigger. So this is Iron Giant. It's one of my favorites in 1999. The little boy's name is Hogarth Hughes, which I think is adorable. And he discovers and befriends this giant robot. And there's a trigger where it's set in the Cold War. And so basically, the town's going to be demolished. And so the robot triggers with this connection he has with the child and saves the day, basically. And so there's something that happens. There's a catalyst, there's an incident that happens. So you have the role, you have the context, and you have something that happens that provokes a reaction or provokes a response. And so with this, there might be an immediate response, which might be an emotion, but there's an immediate kind of aftermath to that trigger. With this little boy, it was basically of grief because he knew that his friend was going to die. His friend, the robot, which, again, adorable. I highly recommend. There might be, from that immediate response, another response. There might be something that needs to be processed or that needs to be, that comes in maybe 2 days, 3 days, or 4 weeks or months later. And that's the other response. And so there's a meaning and significance we attach to the interaction, to the trigger, to the response, and then there's something else that happens. And I think Rachel did a great job of talking about all the emotions that are the undercurrent of every conversation and interaction that we face, and that sometimes we have a really hard time talking about. So with Terminator, 1984, I think most people know. Maybe some people don't know Terminator. Is there anybody that doesn't know Terminator? Oh my gosh, we have one. Okay, so Terminator is a cyborg assassin coming back from 2029, which I think is like only 10 years from now, yeah? And comes from the future. Sorry, I just love this film. I love specifically this moment. Like, I cry and cry at this moment where he's like melting. We all remember this moment? I think that's the hand that then is the future prequel, or whatever the hell it is. Okay, so there's emotion. We have to get more comfortable with emotion. So what I'll leave you with is 2 things. One is I had the great privilege, there's a Fry Museum in Seattle, and there's a speaker by the name of Rebecca Albini. I'm butchering her name, that's awful. Okay, Rebecca comes and does these lectures. And she talked about the pop art social consciousness movement. And I love fine art, and I do love a good art lecture. This specifically, I thought, resonated and relevant to this discussion of AI and how I set up the talk of entertainment and media influencing with messaging. So you saw that it changed. It changed from villain to companion. It changed from negative and kind of coming to destroy human race to now being among us in some of the movies, right? Among us to the point that we can't even distinguish what's a human and what's a robot. And so Warhol had this race riot. It was a silkscreen. He did a lot of series with this painting. And basically he took a photograph in a magazine of a race riot and he just screened it huge. Because he believed that we become desensitized, that the repetition of what's in the media and the repetition of what we see loses its impact and its effect. And so any overexposure that you might face to anything around you, it becomes habitual. It's almost just a pattern behavior, and it's things on repeat. And so I thought this was fascinating, one, because I would love more Warhol in this world, but also the fact that what if AI and the messaging around AI is now going to be something where we're uncomfortable, it's awkward, but we're just going to get used to it. So with that, I'll leave you with one of my favorites, Ex Machina, and I don't know what to do now. Do I click here? Is there sound?
You know what I mean by that?
Yes.
What do I mean? Overcome initial social awkwardness.
So let's have a conversation.
Wait, do we have to replay it? Because everybody has like deer in headlights. I think the moment just happened. Okay, so was that it? It kind of was. So it's a psychological thriller, and there's this moment where she talks about awkwardness of, oh, you're going to assess me now, and you're going to judge me. Maybe, Dale, do you mind replaying that? Because it's very subtle, very nuanced, and maybe can get lost. If not,
So we need to break the ice. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
What do I mean?
Overcome initial social awkwardness.
So let's have a conversation.
so we'll start a conversation. I love that. Time's up. Thank you.